Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. Today we are joined with Rob Dawson from the ESPN for an interview regarding all things Manchester United, Ruben Amorim, and also touching a little bit on the ownership as well. So if you have any questions, make sure you get them in the comments to send to Rob. But Rob, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. We've not seen you in a while, I think since the summer, but a lot has happened. Maybe not been the start to the season that a lot of Manchester United fans were hoping for. And considering it's an international break, we've actually got quite a lot to get into. But the first thing I wanted to touch on was Ruben Amorim. A lot of uncertainty about his future. Then Sir Jim Ratcliffe comes out and says, we're backing him for 3 years practically, and he's here to show he's a good manager over 3 years. Do you think what Sir Jim Ratcliffe is saying publicly is also being echoed behind the scenes?
I mean, I think the stance is probably the same. I mean, the stuff that we've been hearing from United privately is that they still want to support Ruben despite, the mixed start to the season. Obviously, a disappointing start to his reign in general over the sort of 10 months, if you take into his Premier League record and all that kind of stuff. The 3 years thing, I think, is Sir Jim just saying whatever he wants. Obviously, a manager can't last for 3 years if you're not winning back-to-back games. I mean, obviously, I think most United fans would accept that you can't survive that. I think the point that Sir Jim was trying to make is that right now they are supportive of him and tried to give a few reasons for that. He pointed to Mikel Arteta at Arsenal, them supporting him through a couple of years of maybe mixed results. And in his eyes, it's obviously paying off now. So the stuff that we've been hearing behind the scenes is that they are supportive of him. They're willing to give him time. Obviously, that is helped by beating Sunderland before the international break. I don't for a second think that they've all sat around in a room and said, we are not going to touch the manager for 3 years, regardless of results, because that's just not how modern football works. I think the point, though, we were trying to get across is that right now they are supportive of him and there are reasons for that.
Do you think Amorim is happy with the support and his relationship with the hierarchy?
I think so. I mean, it's going to be nice for Ruben to hear that because he knows better than anyone that he's under pressure. He's kind of hinted at it a little bit in press conferences where he said things like, Sir Jim thinks that this is the start of a new season. We kind of, whatever happened last season, we've kind of put behind us and we're not really classing that as part of his overall record. And I can understand why they've come to that conclusion. And Ruben's kind of said, well, Sir Jim might think that, but I don't think that I'm taking everything together. But when you hear the co-owner of the football club come out and say that you shouldn't be judged for 3 years, it's obviously going to be a boost for Ruben. The issue, though, again, is that Ruben Amorim is smart enough to know that if results don't pick up in 3 years, that he's not going to be here. He knows full well that he needs to start winning games consistently, playing well, and that's where he's going to get the time from. The time isn't just going to get magically presented to him for 3 years. That's just not the way that football clubs are run these days. It's
funny, isn't it? Because I think Sir Jim said the same thing about Arteta when Ten Hag was still manager, and then next thing you know, he's gone. And
that's it. I can understand what Sir Jim is saying, and I agree with quite a lot of it. I think a little bit of when Sir Jim does these interviews, there is a little bit of he says whatever he wants, and there have been issues with this kind of thing in interviews he's done in the past. Things like saying, United were going to run out of money by Christmas. Now, I think United fans can probably look at it and say, well, I know what he's getting at. Would United have actually run out of money by Christmas? Probably not. But that's Sir Jim kind of putting his own kind of slant on it. Now, I don't for a second think that he is telling Omar Berrada and Jason Wilcox, we are not going to change the manager for 3 years, come what may. The point is, though, that they are supportive of him. They want to show everyone that they are supportive of him, which, in difficult times like this, it does go a long way, particularly when you've got Ruben in the middle of an international break kind of listening to it.
Do you think a big reason for that is because of the situation with Ten Hag and also Dan Ashworth? For example, they said that they were going to stick with Ten Hag, and I think Ashworth and Omar Berrada were on record literally a few weeks before Ten Hag was sacked saying that they're backing him for the season, and then all of a sudden Ten Hag's gone, then Dan Ashworth's gone after a big chase to get him. The hierarchy that are currently inside United were massively pushing for Ruben Amorim. Do you think that makes his case stronger because ultimately they might want to be proved right on this?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons for it. I mean, the first reason is everyone will know that Ruben Amorim, when he got approached to take the job in that November, didn't want to take it. He wanted to take it at the end of the season. Now, you can't push a guy into a burning building and then blame him for getting burnt. Like, everyone knew what was going to happen. Ruben Amorim said, I'm not going to be able to turn this around. It's going to take me till the summer to kind of work out where I'm going with this. Everyone will have seen that the results weren't great. He had to sacrifice an awful lot of Premier League games to pursue success in the Europa League. I just said to you off camera there was a game at Brentford at the end of last season where he started with Obi, Harry Amas and Tyler Fredrickson. Well, Obi's been sent back to the academy. He's not training with the first team anymore. Harry Amas is at Sheffield Wednesday, and Tyler Fredrickson, he's on the fringe of the squad but isn't playing regularly. That kind of show, he had to put that team out in his mind because he had to win against Athletic Bilbao in the week because he wanted to win the Europa League. Now, if he was desperately trying to preserve his own record, then he would have, he could have easily said, well, I'm just going to go and try and win every game regardless of the competition, and if we lose in the Europa League, we lose. I don't really care. But what he tried to do was do the best thing for what he felt was best for Man United. So there's that. There's also, he's coming in the summer, he's got a new centre forward, he's got two new forwards in Brian Mbeumo and Mateus Cunha. With Sesko, obviously not Premier League proven, he's a young kid who's come to a different league, the most competitive league in the world. It's going to take time for that to happen. And then you're right to touch on the kind of the Ten Hag thing, that Ruben Amorim is Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe's first major managerial appointment. So clearly they're going to have more kind of skin in the game when it comes to him than they had with Erik Ten Hag. They inherited Erik Ten Hag and they wanted to give him time to prove that he was the right man. In the end, they decided that wasn't going to happen. They hired Ruben Amorim. They picked him from what they say was a large group of candidates. They've staked quite a lot of their own reputation on Ruben. And when you're in a situation like that, it's only natural, I think, to give that guy more time because you're desperate for it all to work out. So when you take all those kind of factors into consideration, you can kind of understand why Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Omar Berrada, Jason Wilcox are looking at Ruben Amorim, and thinking, we need to give him time. We want him to turn it around.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of fans will think about, it's only natural they're going to think about last season, even though Amorim, like you said, really didn't want to come at that moment in time. And I wanted to ask you as well, before I touch on a little bit of the players, but you are obviously, you see Ruben Amorim weekly in the press conferences, you see him a lot. Do you think his demeanour, do you think he's changed at all? Do you think he still looks as confident in himself as he was when he first came into the job?
I think so. It's only natural that his confidence is going to be knocked a little bit because everyone in football, whether you're a player or a manager, has that arrogance about them, that they think that they can come into a new club, a new team and turn things around. He wouldn't have come to Man United if he didn't believe that he could do that. Even though he's seen Jose Mourinho, Louis van Gaal, Solskjaer, Ten Hag all come in and fail, he's obviously felt I can come in and make a difference and turn it around. So that has to come with a little bit of arrogance. In terms of his demeanour, I think he's quite emotional. He said that himself, that he doesn't give team talks to players after games because he feels too emotional. Now, he can decide not to talk to his players, but he can't decide not to come and talk to the media. So you get situations where he's had really bad defeats like Grimsby, where he comes out and goes, everything's terrible, maybe I need to talk to the ownership, you can change the manager but you can't change 22 players, and everyone goes, oh, you're gonna quit. And it's just him being emotional, and he says that sometimes he needs to go and sit in a dark room for 10 minutes, collect his thoughts.
I feel him.
Well, yeah, I'm sure lots of United fans probably think the same. Sit in a room for 10 minutes, collect his thoughts, and then come out, and then he's fine. When I've seen him after games this season, it's felt like he's been able to deal with the setbacks a lot better than perhaps he did last year. I think actually that someone at some stage over the summer possibly has said to him, look, you need to it's important, but people are going to hang on every word. So when you say things like, this is the worst Man United team ever, that's a great headline for the press. Maybe just kind of dial it down slightly and maybe change the way that you communicate. United think he's a great communicator, but there are ways and means of kind of doing it and what he says. So I think he's kind of learned his lesson from that. I think he's a lot more kind of cautious perhaps in what he's saying after games this year. But when we see him, you see him after Brentford, for example, which was a poor performance, a bad defeat. Everyone's kind of expecting him to come in and be really emotional again and kind of, say that everything's terrible. And he didn't. He felt quite calm and collected. And even people at United said that when he came in, they were surprised at how calm he was. And I think he's kind of learning to kind of understand the role and the responsibility of speaking in front of the camera, and I think he's learning to manage it a bit better. Obviously, he would like better results because it's easier to speak to the media when you've won, but I think he is learning that side of things.
I think as well, you know, people forget he's such a young manager, and he's learning on the job, and the argument would be, should United really have someone in situ? Such a big task when you want to be competing at the top of the league, who is also learning. But United are at a point in time where, you know, you're not towards the top of the league, and you need to just focus on getting back in the top half of the table right now.
There are things that people don't really maybe like understand, like he's communicating in his second language. His English is fantastic, but it's not his first language, and also he's coming from a country where there is a lot of pressure on Portuguese managers to show emotion and kind of this performative manner on the touchline. Now, in England, we sometimes see that as a sign of weakness, where in Portugal, there are managers in Portugal who get criticised for not showing enough emotion, not jumping up and down on the touchline, not crouching down with your nice trousers on, jumping up like when there's a goal. So he's learned to be a manager in Portugal, where that's really important, and he's come to England where it's not so important. So he's learning these kind of cultural differences, and you know, people might be listening to that and go, well, I don't care about that, like I only care about in winning games. But it all feeds into the same thing. It all feeds into the perception of the manager, and he is learning to kind of deal with these things, to change these little things, to kind of make himself more adaptable to English football, and it is going to take time.
Well, it's even like when he first came in, he didn't want Casemiro anywhere near the team, and now he's so reliant on him, and that's something that he's learned and changed. When people say he doesn't adapt, maybe he's had to adapt because he's not got the midfield options, but he has in that aspect. And then a lot of people are coming into the comments, and thank you very much everyone for getting your comments in and watching the video, asking me to ask about the ownership. I will ask about that at some point, but I'm just going to continue a little bit with Amorim first. And I wanted to ask you about something that you reported actually, Rob, and that was that Manchester United players, I don't know, all or some, you can expand on that, were asked for their thoughts on Ruben Amorim. I mean, how did that process come about, and can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, it's come from speaking to people who are connected to players. It came after, you might have seen Matthijs de Ligt after Brentford came out and was supportive of Ruben Amorim. After Sunderland, Mason Mount said we're 100% behind the gaffer. So they've been supportive publicly. The people around the players are saying, well, that's not something that these players haven't told the ownership face to face. And it certainly wasn't that Jason Wilcox and Omar Berrada have gone round the squad at Carrington and gone, right, what do you think about Ruben? Are you
in or out?
Are you Ruben in or Ruben out? That's not what's happened at all. But what's happened with the new layout of Carrington is that, you know, people like Omar Berrada, Jason Wilcox, whereas one, you know, in the past they may have been based at Old Trafford and now got offices at Carrington. The football people are expected to be at Carrington more often than not. It means that there's more face-to-face time with players and staff, and Jason Wilcox and Omar Berrada have taken it upon themselves to be quite hands-on with just kind of assessing what the mood is, and not necessarily just with Ruben, about whether the things at the training ground that they don't like, are there no issues with the training pictures that aren't right, is there issues with the schedule, all these kind of things that they just want to kind of keep on top of. And the best way to do that is by really casual conversations in and around Carrington that they perhaps wouldn't have been able to do if they'd been at Old Trafford. The feedback that the players and people around Carrington have given the leadership is that obviously everyone's disappointed at the results, but there is no kind of feeling that there's no support of Ruben. They've been quite positive of Ruben. They are behind what he's trying to do. They understand the problems he's having to deal with, because ultimately the mood of the dressing room is one of the major factors which is going to decide Amorim's future. You know, the results are one thing, but if the dressing room completely goes one day, then they're going to have to make a change. And in the story that I wrote, I referenced the time with Ed Woodward and Jose Mourinho. Now, Jose's results at the end weren't great, but the thing that tipped it over the edge was that the players just weren't having him anymore. There was a lot of tension in the dressing room, they weren't behind him, and the feeling that Ed Woodward had was that this situation is just not reversible now. It's just going to get worse and worse because the players have not down tools. That's just, players don't ever down tools, but they're just not behind what the manager was trying to do. The feedback that the leadership have been given in this instance is that the players are very much behind what Ruben is trying to do, and they understand the challenges, and also they put an awful lot of emphasis on themselves. You know, I don't think this is a group who are going to say, well, actually, like, we're losing because of the manager. They've put a lot of kind of blame and responsibility on themselves, and a lot of the feedback that's come back is, well, you know, the first thing that needs to change is we need to play better. that was certainly the reaction after the Brentford game. That was nothing to do with systems or tactics or anything like that. The 11 players who were on the pitch didn't perform, and that's why they lost the game. And these are just little things that Omar Berrada and Jason Wilcox are keeping an eye on. And I think, to be honest, I think it's a good thing. I mean, obviously there's a fine line with that. No, I don't think fans want to see the chief exec and the director of football in the dressing room kind of going around players, and that's not what's happening at all. But I think it's good that they're keeping an eye on the mood and things that are happening around Carrington, because it helps them make an informed choice when there is a decision to be made. Right now, they feel like there is no decision to be made because the players are supportive of what Ruben is trying to do and what his staff are trying to do, and so they're happy with that. Maybe in 3 months, 6 months, that changes, and the conversations that Omar and Jason are having reflect that, and they'll be able to go away and say, well, actually, like what we thought 3 months ago, that's changed a little bit, and they can add that into their thinking. I just think it's a positive way that a football club should be run.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's good to see more hands-on in Carrington, as long as, like you said, there's a line that isn't crossed.
And I think that Omar in particular is very kind of conscious of that Omar Berrada is an incredibly intelligent guy. If you ask anyone at Carrington or Old Trafford about the appointment, the biggest appointment that they've made since Sir Jim came in, most people will point to Omar Berrada because of his business sense, of his experience in football at Manchester City and Barcelona, of his contacts that he's got across Europe, of his ability to kind of speak to people on their level, and his kind of communication ability. All these things make him a really valuable asset to Man United, and I think he would be particularly conscious of not crossing that line. He wants to be hands-on, he wants to show that he cares, but doesn't want to cross that line because he understands that there's a certain point that becomes Ruben's responsibility, and it is a big contrast to what we've seen in the past, because Richard Arnold, I don't want to point fingers at Richard Arnold, but he spent all of his working week at Old Trafford, so he wasn't very hands-on at all. He was very kind of distant with the players and staff, and that gives you a different idea of what's going on at Carrington. And when it comes to making those big decisions, you're not as informed. Omar Berrada is informed about what's going on. He knows exactly what's happening in all areas of the club. He's very kind of conscious of sticking to his lane, but understands that he needs an overview of everything. And when it comes to making these big decisions or informing Jim before a big decision, he's the guy that's going to do that. And I do think it's positive that maybe we've gone from Richard Arnold, who was quite hands-off and distant, to Omar and Jason, who are a bit more hands-on with that kind of thing.
It is positive. I just hope it comes into fruition with results on the pitch eventually, and that's all about the patient approach that they have put into place, but also we kind of need instant results. I mean, I just wanted to quickly ask you, while we round up on Ruben Amorim as well, if you've got any insight on how he is with the squad, because there was some reports that the senior leadership team is the main players he will speak to, like the Bruno Fernandes, Harry Maguire, Diogo Dalot, and then he's quite distant with the other members of the squad. I mean, what is his type of relationship like with them, do you know?
Well, he was certainly brought in to be different from Erik ten Hag, because Erik ten Hag, the players had come to feel that he was quite authoritarian with them, and they didn't really. Initially, they quite liked that because they felt like there was no rules in the dressing room. Eventually, they thought it was too much, and they didn't really like it. It was one of the reasons why, when Erik left, that United went for someone like Ruben, because he'd been a player at the top level himself. That the feedback they got was that he was very good in terms of man management. He was very, it wasn't kind of, manager and player relationship. It was a lot more kind of arm around the shoulder relationship. I think that Ruben was a little bit surprised at the things that he had to deal with last season, that there were issues in the dressing room that ended up on his desk that he felt that he didn't or shouldn't have to deal with, which is why he's created that leadership team. And he said to that leadership team, this kind of issue, these small kind of things, I'll deal with the big stuff, but this small kind of stuff I don't want to know about. You solve that yourself. Now, he still has to know about it, and to know about it, he has to speak to Bruno, to Diogo, Tom Heaton, Lisandro Martinez, all the rest of them. So there is a kind of perhaps more of a distance now than there was last season, because he was doing everything. But one of his strengths is that relationship with the players, and I think you've seen that with some of the stuff that you've seen that he's brought in. daft little things like the gauntlet when you come back to training, if you've played your 100th game or signed a new contract or come back from injury. Ruben Amorim is right there in the middle of the gauntlet, tapping people on the head. When it's your birthday at Carrington, you get a cake. Everyone gets a different kind of cake depending on what you like. Ruben's there, gathering everyone. There's a little speech from the player who's had his birthday. Again, a really small thing, but it kind of fosters, or he's trying to foster, team spirit, because he's felt that's been missing at United. So I think he's probably a little bit more hands-off than perhaps he was last year, but he's certainly been brought in. One of his strengths at United feel is that his relationship with the players. And I think you've seen that, with the story that we just talked about there, with the players kind of very supportive of him. You wouldn't have that if he was very distant. He doesn't even really have an office at Carrington. In the past, there's been an office at Carrington, which is the manager's office, and you knock on the door. That's where you go on. Yeah, it's like knocking on your headmaster's door. Like, you don't ever see him until you get sent there because you've been naughty. Whereas Ruben is right in the middle of everyone. He's in this big kind of conference room at Carrington with his coaches. It's a big glass fronted. Everyone sees him all the time. He's in his big communal areas. I've been at Carrington before when Jose Mourinho was manager. We went on a trip to Russia, and United let us do our visas at Carrington with all the players. And Jose comes through the corridor and everyone stops like this. Everyone's like, it's like the headmaster coming through the corridor. No one wants to be seen doing anything naughty. That's exactly the opposite of what it's like at Carrington now, because ultimately Ruben is the head coach and he's responsible for everyone, but he's far more of a mate to everyone than perhaps we've seen with Jose and particularly Erik ten Hag.
Yeah, I think that's a positive, that the players do have a good relationship with the manager. And when you say about him having to do more with the dressing room last season than this season, I don't know if it's the exact same thing, but he alluded to recently in his press conference, you don't know what I've had to deal with behind the scenes. And I'm sure there was a lot behind the scenes culturally that he did have to deal with. Yeah,
and I think that's probably one of the reasons why he didn't want to come in November, because on the face of it, you sort of say, well, he's coming to a new league, a new country, all the kind of family stuff that goes with it. He's got to move his wife, and his kids are in school, so his kids need to fight, all this kind of stuff. But then he's also got to get dropped into a dressing room that is obviously failing, because why would you change a manager if the dressing room's successful? And he's got to deal with all this kind of little, niggly work stuff where it's ending up on his desk, and he's thinking, like, guys, come on, like, we're all adults, like, you should be sorting this yourself. So it's not as simple as just saying, his job is to get his system across the players, it's his job to coach the players. I think he felt that the job last year was far more than he was expecting, because his job, he thought, was to come in and coach the players, when actually he's having to kind of be like headmaster, playground monitor, all this kind of stuff that he just doesn't want to do. He wants to be a coach on the pitch, coaching his players. And if he can kind of get rid of all that other stuff as best he can, delegate it to other people, then that frees him up to be a better coach. And I think finally now, obviously you were there in Chicago and we saw how kind of positive it all was in the summer. After the summer, the positivity of that has been brought into the season. I think he's finally getting to grips with what the job actually is and how he wants to do it himself.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you look at Ruben Amorim and you see how much he's had to do, and then also he's got about 1,000 interviews in between that in the week.
I think people underestimate these things, like how much and how tough a job he's had. And then on top of it, like the media stuff, like at Sporting Lisbon, he reckoned that he had one press conference, one sit-down TV thing, and then he'd be off and go and see his players. We went to the Europa League preview day, the Europa League final preview day at Old Trafford last year, where he was late to his press conference because he had to do about 11 sit-down TV interviews. Now, I'm not criticising that, because that's part of Man United. That's the reason me and you were here talking about Man United.
That's what I'm saying. I can't criticise the media because
I would never criticise it. And the reason we're talking about it is because there's so much interest, and Man United's a massive club, and that's why there are so many TV interviews. But if you're not familiar with that, then that's quite a big thing that he has to get used to. And again, people will say, well, yeah, but you're manager of Man United, get used to it. Well, he is getting used to it, but it takes time.
It is part and parcel of being the Manchester United job, one of the most talked about football clubs in the world, and you do have a lot of media does come with that, which we are part of, so you can understand it and you like it, because that's what we do. But also at the same time, it's I remember when he first came in and on air, he mentioned, I'm going to have to tell Andrew I don't want to do any more interviews.
Yeah. and there are things like, little tiny things like, you'll see on broadcast, on interviews, that sometimes you'll do it in the tunnel, in front of the boards holding a mic, and other times you'll be asked to come to like the Sky Sports desk, and he's very conscious that he doesn't want. He thinks of like things like coming to the desk for Sky Sports as being like, oh, it's a big interview, and he doesn't want to do that if the result hasn't matched, that kind of scenario. So if it's been a poor performance or a poor result, he doesn't want to come to the desk and give this big kind of tub thumping interview. He wants to do it in the tunnel, with a mic, couple of questions, and get out of there. And you can understand that, because it is a lot to deal with. I genuinely feel quite sorry for him sometimes, because he's getting an awful lot of stick at the moment, from a lot of different angles. Again, if he was sat here now, he would say, well, I've only won 10 Premier League games, so what can you do? And I get that. But there is an awful lot behind the scenes that perhaps fans don't see, that he is having to deal with, having to come to terms with. And he only can do that if he gets time.
Yeah, well, we'll see if he does get time. I mean, things could change massively if there was a potential new ownership, which had just come back on the scene recently. I know, we're nowhere near at the stage yet where we can talk about this in detail, but I did want to ask you about it, because initially it started with reports of Saudi interest, then that was shut down. Now there's talk of a UAE potential bid, a UAE consortium putting a bid in for some sort of investment or ownership of Manchester United. I mean, do you know if Man United have any awareness of this, and would this be coming from the Glazer side, I assume?
Yes, I mean, obviously this has started from a tweet from Turki Al-Sheikh, who's, you see an awful lot of rumours doing this job. You'll be the same. A lot of rumours about Man United, and kind of your job to decide what is right and what's wrong. That tweet got an awful lot of traction because of who he is. He is, a major player in terms of Saudi sport. I've been there a couple of times to do features on Ronaldo and things like that. And you can't talk about Saudi sport without him being involved. That's how big a player he is. So when he tweets it, you kind of have to take it at face value, and you do have to kind of give it some credence. In terms of the contact about that with Man United, United were very, very surprised to see it yesterday. They had no idea that it was coming. The one comment that we did get was that it was baseless, and they wouldn't have said that if they genuinely thought there was something in it. Again, though, it's an unusual situation in that the guy who said it, you would think would know his stuff, and
he's
not in the habit. The one thing that I spoke to people in Saudi Arabia yesterday who said that they also hadn't heard it, and that they had seen it same as everyone on X. But the one that the Turki Al-Sheikh is not in the habit of making himself look silly. So he must feel like there is something in it. Now, United are saying not. It could possibly be that the Glazers are free to negotiate with whoever they want. That wouldn't necessarily involve the people at Man United until quite late on down the line, because obviously the Glazer family are based in Florida. They can negotiate with who they want. Everyone will know now about that drag-along clause that they had in the deal with Jim Ratcliffe that took it to, they weren't allowed to sell until, I think it was 18 months, and the deadline for that was in August the 13th, I think. Obviously that has now passed. In theory, they are able to negotiate with whoever they want. So those two things put together meant that a lot of journalists in Manchester, me included, were kind of scrabbling around yesterday trying to find out if there was anything in it. As of right now, we're being told that there's not. Now, that's not to say that there won't be something else later down the line, and there are clearly conversations going on between United and people in Saudi Arabia because of that the mid-season friendly that's going to happen. So right now, United are saying not, but again, you can never rule anything out.
Yeah, especially because when you have a dual ownership like that, where Sir Jim has percentage, the Glazers have a percentage, and then there is that drag-along clause, you would always think that that's in there for a reason. The Glazers basically, correct me if I'm wrong, don't have much input into Manchester United anymore. It's Sir Jim is running the football inside of it. And they've taken such a step back. You would think if anyone was willing to negotiate for their valuation, which has been put out there to be $5 billion, which is a lot, and also you look at Man United and you think, is it really raising itself in value right now? Things seem to be getting worse. Hopefully that turns around. They could be having them conversations potentially.
Yeah, there are two things with this. The first is that, You know, the Glazers for a long time got an awful lot of criticism and stick, and are still doing, but they are slightly insulated to that now because Sir Jim Ratcliffe is there, kind of taking the heat off a little bit. I mean, realistically, right now the Glazers are sat in Florida collecting a cheque every month. It's probably the perfect scenario. You know, United, they are still getting paid. You know, they are still in charge of a massive football club. So if you're not getting the stick that you were, say, 2 years ago, then why would you want to sell up? The only other thing with that is that, and again, I spoke to you off camera about this, that you'll remember that Richard Arnold spoke to fans in a bar or a pub a couple of years ago where he was talking about United's financial troubles long before Sir Jim Ratcliffe came on the scene. But he said that the Glazers had realised that the stadium was not up to scratch, and the stadium had to be improved, and to do that would need a massive amount of finance, and that they just didn't have it. And the reason to go out and look for outside investment was ultimately to do the stadium. Fast forward a couple of months, and the Glazers put that statement out during the Qatar World Cup saying we are looking for outside investment, possibly we're going to sell the club. So Jim Ratcliffe comes on board, he puts his money in, you know, money's been used to redevelop Carrington, but there is still no money for the stadium. So if the money to finance the stadium was your initial motivation to get outside investment, that issue is still there. You know, we all went down to London to hear, you know, these grand plans about the stadium and how fantastic it was going to be, and, you know, heard from the architect and all this kind of detail about how they were going to get parts of the stadium down the Manchester Ship Canal and build it with this big canopy and all this kind of stuff. The one question that people couldn't answer was where the money's coming from. You know, that stadium is going to cost £2 billion. It's not change that you find down the back of the sofa. It's a massive amount of money. So if your issue back when Richard Arnold was talking about it was about where we're going to get this money from, that question's not been solved. And if it hasn't been solved, then you need to go out and find it. And if you need to go out and find it, then you are possibly looking at Saudi Arabia, UAE. Now, how that would work, I don't know, because you've already got the Glazers, who are majority owners. You've got Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who is a minority owner but is in charge of football operations. It's a very unusual business agreement because the minority owners of any business, sport franchise or anything, don't usually have that amount of control. So if there was another investor coming in, how would that work with three? Would they just say, here's the money for the stadium and take a back seat and not want anything to do with it? Would they say, here's the money, but actually you've given Jim Ratcliffe a say, I want a say too? You know, how would that even work? So there are a lot of unanswered questions. The point of all that is United still need to find money for the stadium. So if you still have to find it, then it's only natural that those conversations possibly are happening behind the scenes.
I mean, do you think there's a scenario, I know, you know, you can kind of just have an opinion on this. Do you think there's a scenario where the Glazers depart and then somebody else comes in and joins Sir Jim Ratcliffe?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's possible that the Glazers at some stage will say, we've had enough now. Like, we think that, I don't know, the club's valuation has reached a point where we think that's fair. We don't really want the hassle of all this stick that we're getting. Perhaps they need money for other ventures. Maybe they need money to invest. They want more money to invest in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Maybe they've got another business venture in the States that they need financing for. Maybe they just decide one day that they're tired of it and they want to take the money and run. Again, the issue with that is that I think Joel Glazer is the main Glazer who's involved in the kind of the running of Man United, but he's also got a lot of siblings who've got shares who you'd also have to get all of them to agree to the same price and the same motivation to sell. So even that in itself is complicated. You know, when this all started, when the Glazers essentially put the club up for sale, I was told by someone who, you know, no one's really particularly close to the Glazers who you get to speak to, but someone who was as close as you can be, said that even at the time they had no real intention to sell because they knew what they had. Essentially, they're sat on a cash cow. You know, Man United is always going to be a source of money, and so why would you get rid of that? Which again, I would imagine that point still stands, but you know, eventually, maybe one day they do wake up and say, if I can get 10 million or 10 billion from Saudi Arabia, maybe we do take that and just cut and run.
Do you know what as well is like the stadium? I couldn't imagine them walking away before the stadium is built because that's going to add such value onto your footballing club.
Well, it is. I mean, so if you think that United make what is it, about 5 million every match day, and the stadium's not great, there's also not a lot of kind of food and drink options, and it's not a great. I think everyone would agree it's not a great match day experience when you consider what it's like at, say, Tottenham Hotspur. If you could marry Man United's brand and a winning team with a 100,000 seat stadium that is surrounded by food places and restaurants and bars and pubs and all this kind of stuff, imagine what you make on a match day then. If you're one of the Glazer siblings, you're thinking, well, if we're making 5 million now, maybe we could make double that and more every single match. So if there is a way of getting the stadium done and we can stay, then it would make sense for them to stay. Maybe there's not a situation, maybe there's not a scenario where they can stay and you can still get that money for the stadium. Because the one thing that has to change, regardless of all this ownership stuff, is the stadium, because it's getting worse.
And they don't have the money to do it.
They don't have the money to do it, and you need to get it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the plans came out of basically nowhere, public and grand plans, but then there's not the investment there to do it, which.
Well, I mean, there was a theory at the time that kind of big launch was to attract investors. And I know lots of people, when we first arrived in Chicago, lots of the leadership team weren't in Chicago. A couple of them went straight to New York to talk to investors about potentially the stadium and what that kind of investment would look like. I mean, in United's defence with this, there is a lot of moving parts. They do need kind of government approval. They need Traffic Council to be on board. It's not just a stadium. They need transport links. They need better tram stops. They need the train. They need, the housing project that's going to go around it to make it the entire project worthwhile. And obviously they're not in charge of all of that stuff. They need all this red tape to be cut through. I kind of get that, but the one question that everyone had when we went down to London for the launch was, how much is it going to cost? To which they said 2 billion is a fair number for you to report. The second question was, where's that coming from? And no one could answer that with any kind of detail.
Yeah, so it looks as if that Manchester United would be seeking some sort of investment or funding for that stadium, which again is like, not to repeat what you said, but it is confusing that the Glazers had them plans to do the stadium, was looking for investment for that, and then you've ended up in a situation where, I know Sir Jim's got good intentions on the footballing side, where you've still not got the funding when that was your initial intention. But
well, I mean, you remember though that there was Sir Jim Ratcliffe who was involved. There was Sheikh Jassim, who got an awful lot of press, but apparently never produced the proof of funds to proceed. But there were also a lot of companies and hedge funds and equity investors who were interested in coming in with a minority investment. I forget the names off the top of my head, but you can go back and look at it. Was very well reported at the time. Now, none of those companies were looking for any kind of sporting control. They wanted to invest in Man United on the understanding that they were going to get the money back. Now, that would make more sense if you were looking for funding for the stadium, because you could say to an investor, we value the club at 10 billion, you give us 2 billion, we're going to use that 2 billion to build a stadium. When the value of the franchise is worth 15 billion or 20 billion, you'll get your money back and it'll be doubled. That's the way that you do it. Now, the way that it's all played out is a little bit different, because the Jim's come in, he's taken sporting control, but you still need the money for the stadium. It is possible that you could go back to one of those other companies and say, is that deal still on? Now, again, I'm just speculating and talking like it's pie in the sky stuff, really, but it is a possibility that that's the kind of investment you were looking for. Could that come from Saudi Arabia or the UAE? Yeah, it's possible. Would
they want to do that without full control? Because that usually, from that side of the world, they want full ownership and full control, and they've got the money to do so.
It's complicated. It's very, very complicated now. I mean, everyone is just waiting for United to say now where this money is coming from the stadium, because one of the questions that were put to the people at United when we went down for that launch was, could they break ground in 2025? And the answer that came back was yes. Now, I imagine that was quite ambitious, but what is it now, like early October? Mm-hmm. We're not having a spade in the ground before New Year's Eve, are we, realistically? So, something has to change somewhere for these plans to actually get put in motion. What you need, aside from kind of government approval, you need the money. And no one as yet has said where the money's going to come from.
We'll have to wait and see on that one. We've got a couple of people in the comments putting their questions in. Who to Blame says, everyone in the club is learning on the job. They need to stick together and trust in the decisions they're making. Amorim in until the deadwood is out. And Rob Always United has asked, what is the feeling around Senny Larmans? Well, I do want to touch a little bit on players, a little bit about Kobbie Mainoo and Senny Larmans, new signings, etc. I mean, Rob, we'll start off with the new signings. What's the overall feeling with the new signings? I mean, I know Sesko needed a little bit of time to adapt. Yeah. Maybe wasn't number one choice. Same with Senny Larmans, really, but everyone was impressed with him after his debut. I mean, what is the feeling behind the scenes about these players?
I think mostly it's been positive. I mean, the one thing I would say with that is that there's an important distinction about where these players have all come from. And I think I've seen a little bit, fans on social media sort of say, well, Ruben should be doing better because he spent £250 million on players. Well, that's not strictly true. Mm-hmm. 250 million has been spent under his watch. We are led to believe, pushed for some of those signings, not so much for others, but wanted to accept a player in that position because he knew he needed bodies. So with the likes of Senny Larmans, is obviously a goalkeeper with quite a high ceiling. You'll have seen on Saturday against Sunderland what he's capable of, but there was a feeling around the club that Ruben Amorim would have preferred Emi Martinez. He's far more experienced as a World Cup winner, Premier League proven, he could have been thrown in straight away. He's also made a comment in one interview saying that he doesn't think the squad has got enough crazy guys, is the phrase he used. Well, Emi Martinez is that guy and a bit more. So I don't want to say he's had to make do with some of the players he's got, but it's unfair to sort of say to him, this is your team now, make it work, because it's not. I genuinely don't think that Benjamin Sesko would have been his first choice. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't want him, because he probably realised that he needed a centre forward. I very much doubt that he was top of the list for Ruben Amorim, but it's the signing that came together when everyone kind of decided in their little committee. So it's going to take time for these players to kind of adapt to what Ruben wants. I would have, from a personal point of view, I'd have preferred some of the money to be spent on a central midfielder. I don't think you need Sesko, Cunha and Mbeumo. I think that you could have probably signed Sesko and one of Cunha and Mbeumo and used some of that money to sign a central midfielder. I think that having an energetic central midfielder who covers a lot of ground is far more important to that system than another forward. Obviously, United went another way. United decided that they wanted to sign 3 forwards because their data team said that they felt that the biggest way that they could improve, or the biggest thing that held them back last season, was a lack of goals. So they wanted to address that first. Now, my counter argument to that would be, well, you're signing goals in Sesko and one of Cunha and Mbeumo anyway. You've got Mason Mount who can play as a 10, Ahmad who can play as a 10, Joshua Zirkzee who can play as a 10, Bruno who can play as a 10. You probably didn't need another one. You probably did need another central midfielder, particularly if you're not really having Agate and you're not really having Kobbie Mainoo. Now, United's recruitment team have decided that they've gone a different way. My concern is that hole in the midfield is just going to stay there until it's solved. And if you've got a hole in midfield, you're going to struggle.
Well, a lot of people put it on Amorim signing 2 number 10s. Amorim wanting you 2 number 10s, and I'm not sat here saying maybe he didn't, because it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah. But
I think a lot of people blame him for that. But there was data. There was data behind it.
I think that's unfair to blame him for not. The problem is that we get a chance or 2 chances every week to speak to Ruben, and he's already said, he came out in a press conference a couple of weeks ago. It was the very last question where I think he was being asked by Kobbie Mainoo, and he said, it was like the 6th question that he'd been asked about Kobbie, and he went, guys, I'm always going to tell you I love my players. I'm never going to say I don't like my players. I'm always going to say I love them, which essentially means I'm always going to defend my players. I'm always going to defend my club. I'm always going to defend my bosses. Keep asking me about this stuff. I'm just going to say the same thing over and over again. Now, is that how it played out behind the scenes? I'm not so sure. He's a smart enough guy to know that he needs a central midfielder in that system. And you can see with the links to Belieber at Brighton, Adam Wharton at Palace, even looked at a couple of lads who were at Wolves. He knows that he needs a central midfielder, but managers always want more players. That's just the nature of managers. So if a recruitment team decides and says, look, our data suggests that the best way to improve this team is to add more goals, we don't think that we can get your midfielder for the price. What we do think we can get is Cunha for 62.5 million and Mbeumo for 70 million. We think that's a better way to go. What do you think? I think he has then gone, yeah, okay, I understand that, let's go, kind of thing. But there's still a hole in the midfield. And
we're not, obviously, I mean, I don't know how you feel, Rob, but I think Cunha and Mbeumo are both brilliant players.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that either of them are bad signings, definitely not. But everyone was well aware that the budget this summer was limited. Now, I must say, Omar Berrada needs a round of applause for squeezing every last penny out of that transfer budget, because the money that was spent in the summer, it did not look like that when they were looking after the Europa League final. The way that they've kind of structured deals in terms of payments, the way that they've timed outgoings has allowed them to squeeze every last penny out of that budget. And Omar Berrada in particular needs a lot of credit for that. And United said to us that they know that the squad is not where it should be, but they can't do everything in one summer. And so it's basically like a jigsaw puzzle. You know, they've decided that they could get 3 good attackers for reasonable prices. They're left at the end of the summer with around sort of £25 million. Are you going to get a world-class central midfielder for £25 million? No. But we can go and get Senna Lammens from Royal Antwerp, who we've looked at for a long time, and we think he's pretty good. What do you think? And he's like, well, okay, well, yeah, let's do that then. I think that criticising Ruben for the recruitment policy and what the signings that have come in is wrong, because like you just said there, it's a collaborative effort, and he's a part of that. He's not like in charge of everything. He's not the guy that's going yes to him, no to him, yes to him. Like, he's having to use the hand he's been dealt, essentially.
And the question would be as well is, I mean, you look at the Manchester United starting 11 now, or the best starting 11, which I still don't even think Ruben Amorim knows, to be honest with you. And although Cunha and Mbeumo are top players, and for me, Mbeumo's been our best signing of the summer, but, you know, some people might think somebody else. You look and you think, you know, Mbeumo and Mount started at the weekend, they played really well together. If, you know, one of your signings, that was £60-odd million, isn't getting into the team, might not last, but if you would have signed a midfielder and have not 100% certainty, but I have a very strong feeling that they would be playing no matter what in the starting 11, because the midfield is weaker. So it is something to think about, and also I think it's something that shouldn't be used as a beat to stick to beat Ruben Amorim with, which is what has happened.
Yeah, it's a long-term approach to recruitment, and I know again United fans are going to go, I've heard all this before, I don't care, like recruitment's been rubbish for ages, I get all that, but you know, United are hoping that they're going to qualify for Europe next season. So when you've got European games, you know, there is going to be a lot of games for Cunha and Mbeumo and Sesko and Mount and all these players. You know, they felt they had a chance in Cunha and Mbeumo and Sesko to get 3 really good players for a decent price. That was an opportunity that was presented to them at that time. So they've decided to put the bulk of their budget on those players. They didn't feel like they were able to get the right midfielder with the money that they had. Now, Ruben Amorim will know that he probably needs a midfielder to make it work. It's whether he's going to be in charge in a year's time, for when it does come to the time where you sign a midfielder, he's still going to be there. And I think that's part, you know, to go back to the first conversation we had on this show, it would be very unfair, I think, for Sir Jim Ratcliffe to look at it and go, we're going to sack you in the October international break because your results aren't good enough. When Ruben could turn around and go, well, but if you want me to win right now, then give me everything I need right now. Like, it's not fair to say, here's part of what you need, but we want a winning team right now. Judge him when he's got everything. If he gets everything he wants with his wing backs and his midfield player, and he's got Cunha and Mbeumo and Sesko up front, and it's still rubbish, he would be the first one to hold his hands up and go, yeah, fair enough, I haven't made it work. He'd probably quit. He's that kind of guy. But it's very, very unfair to give a manager part of what he needs and expect it to be right straight away. It's just not. And it's unfortunately, that attitude is not the way that modern football works. Because if United get battered at Anfield, there's going to be an awful lot of people in your chat on your laptop saying Ruben out. That's just the way. That's just the way of the world, and he knows that. So right now, it feels like he's kind of fighting, like firefighting a little bit. He has to survive this little bit, get himself to January, get himself to next summer, and then hope he's got enough credit in the bank still to get the pieces of these puzzle to give him the team that can play in the way that he wants it to.
Do you think that if he is still here, which I hope he is, I hope he wins enough games to still be here in January, do you think that he will be given some sort of money to potentially bring in a midfielder? It's always difficult in the January transfer window.
I think it's really, really tough in January, and you know, you get into a situation as well with players like Joshua Zirkzee and Kobbie Mainoo, who clearly haven't played as much as they would like. They've got World Cups that they want to play in. They want to be playing more regular football. They are going to go and speak to Man United before the January window, and if it doesn't improve, say, I want out. Well, you know, they are still part of the squad. Ruben does need options. They would both need replaced. It's really, really hard to do that in January. So I very, very much doubt, sitting here right now, what we're in October, so you've got a couple of months yet, but sitting here, I'd be very, very surprised if there was major money spent in January. As I say, because also Omar Berrada squeezed every last drop out of that transfer budget that he possibly could. I think the hope is that United improve to the point where they are on track to reach the Europa League or the Europa Conference League. Maybe they have a good run in the FA Cup. They get to next summer with, you know, some kind of momentum, kind of a little bit of maybe positivity and good feeling around the club about that they're going in the right direction. Maybe by then that we've got news about where the stadium funding is coming from, all this kind of thing. You get to the summer, you know, you've already got Sesko, Cunha and Buemo. You've got Senna Lamens, who has established himself as a number one and looks, you know, far more than a €20 million goalkeeper. And then you say, right, we've got 100 million to spend on a midfielder, whether it's Belieber at Brighton, whether it's Adam Wharton at Palace, or whether it's someone else, Edison possibly at Atalanta, one of those kind of players. That's what I think that they're looking at. But you have to get there. And Amorim will know that we could be quite easily sitting here in the November international break. They've been beaten by Liverpool. Brighton's not gone well. They've got 2 horrible away games against Forest and Tottenham. And the floor has kind of collapsed from underneath him. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because I think he deserves time. I think that, you know, I know I was a little bit critical of Jim Ratcliffe in his 3 years right at the start. In my mind, I would be saying we're not touching him until the summer.
It's a long way from now until the summer.
It is. I appreciate
a long
that.
way. What if genuinely you're in a situation where you are last year and it's like 15th? You're still not?
No.
Wow, you've got faith.
No, because you can't. I don't think that you should be judged on what happened last season. I think that was an absolute disaster for a number of different reasons, and you have to write it off. But judge him on this season. Yeah, it's been mixed, but they've had a tough start. There are signs of improvement, and I just don't think that having made the decision to appoint Amorim, that you can chop and change all the time. Because again, we sat here. Say he gets sacked after Liverpool, and they hire Marco Silva at Fulham, and he gets dropped into a disaster in mid-season. We sat in here a year going, oh, what are we doing? Are we giving Marco Silva time? Like, what's happening? Like, so at some stage, you have to break away from that. You have to be bigger than the situation. So you say to Ruben, we thought that you were our man in November. We put you in an absolute horrific position. Thanks for that, by the way. Now we've got you some players. We know you've not got everything. Try your best to finish in the Europa League places, get us into Europe. That'd be great. We'll see you in the summer for that midfielder that you've been banging on about for the last 10 months. And then we'll see what you've got. That would, in my mind, that is a far more grown-up approach to running Man United. That said, again, if Ruben was sat here, he would say, I'm going to live and die by results. And if I haven't won consecutive games by May, I'm probably not going to be here. Unless United are bottom of the league in March and in serious danger of getting relegated, I wouldn't touch him.
I agree with you that at some point you do have to break the cycle and you do have to stick with someone. For me, it's just like, you've at least got to show me something to stick with. Do you know what I mean?
And
so
do you think
there's levels?
Has he shown you?
It's difficult. There's levels to it, because there's slight improvement where you are, you know, he's not won back-to-back Premier League games in nearly a year.
Yeah, but see, in my mind, I'm forgetting all. and I go back to that Brentford game, right? With the team that he had available, he could have won that Brentford game at the end of last year. And he probably thought, well, that's quite good for me because I've not had many Premier League wins. I need to win at Brentford. But he put out a team that he probably knew were going to get beaten because he knew that in terms of what was important for the club, it was more important to win the Europa League. Now, I completely accept he didn't win it. But in that moment...
And it was a poor performance.
It was. But he could have quite easily said at the end of last season, this hasn't gone very well, but I'm going to try and get myself some Premier League wins. I don't care if we get beaten in the Europa League. I don't care if we're not in Europe. And he didn't. He put his neck on the block, I thought, last season and made himself a lightning rod for criticism in a way that he didn't have to. He tried to do what was best for the club. And I think in my mind, he's got enough credit in the bank not to touch him until at least the summer. The first time I would even be looking at it, if they finish 17th and they avoid relegation by a point, possibly. But if it's 15th, 14th and they're kind of plodding along in mid-table...
My question to you back on that is, do you think this squad... What do you think this current squad is capable of? Because there's having faith and there's sticking with the manager, and even Arteta gets referenced back to, you could see more in the early days of Arteta, I think, than what you can see now. I do think there's been improvement since last season. I do. But we've signed better players. We've got Mbeumo and Cunha and Mount, and you've got players that are just better players. So is that the manager, or is it the players just being better as to why we've shown that improvement? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean that's a valid argument. Have you just kind of like chucked better ingredients into your pie and that's why the pie tastes better, or is it the cook who's done it in a different way?
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of both things. But again, I don't think you can't just chuck Sesko, Cunha and Mbeumo into a failing team and go, right, make that work, because it takes all this stuff. It takes time, and I think he genuinely deserves time. Now, loads of United fans are going to go mad, but I think if he finishes in the top 10, as a United fan, I would say it's
improvement.
That's improvement. If you're in and around, I think if he can finish in the Europa League places, which he's on course to do, as the table sits right now, I appreciate we're only 7 games in, but if he was to get into Europe from 15th, I think that is quite a significant achievement. So he should be given credit for that.
Absolutely. If he does that, then I will recognise that there's been improvement and there's something to build with. I like the personality that he's got. I like the decisions he's made behind the scenes. I like the way he presents himself. But at this moment in time, I'm looking at it and the only teams we're beating are either newly promoted, relegated sides or down to 10 men.
Right. But, okay, let me ask you a question then, right? So if you're happy with finishing in the Europa League places, if United on Christmas Day are 10th, are you giving him more time or are you sacking him?
I'd give him more time.
Because
I'd give him till the end of the season from that point.
See, in my mind, that's quite a grown-up view, but it needs fans to reassess what their expectations are, because United are a club that's been built on winning every single game. Now that isn't going to happen at this. You have to reassess where we're at. So if you're 10th on Christmas Day, you can still finish 6th or 7th and qualify for Europe, and he deserves, that to be a consideration. And I'll one of the names that's being mentioned is Oliver Glasner at Palace, done a fantastic job. But he's been beat at Everton at the weekend, and no one's really said a peep. Now, obviously, that's on the back of a long unbeaten run.
Did you watch the game though?
Yeah, I watched.
He played really well.
But they lost. What happens to Man United managers when they get beat at Everton? It's crisis. There needs to be a kind of a rowing back of what the expectation is for the team. And a lot of people go, "What do you mean expectation? We finished 15th last year." I get it. But every single Man United fan who's watching this in your chat is still expecting them to win every single game. Every time they turn up, United, whether they play with a great team, a bad team, a team of kids, is expected to win every single game. That is not where this club is at. You need to have very, very small continual steps forward. And that means that if they are 14th in the November international break, and then 13th at Christmas, and then possibly 10th in February, and then up and around those Europa League places, you have to give Amorim credit for that. And I know it's not what Man United fans are used to, because they're used to winning the European Cup and the Premier League and all that kind of stuff. That is not where they're at. You can't say that this is a work in progress squad-wise and not say it's a work in progress manager-wise. You can't judge the manager short-term and the squad long-term. It has to be both together.
I get that. I do get that. And I agree with you. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But I also think, you know, there's a difference between here and here. You know, I'm not expecting us to win every game, but I also expect us to be winning at least some back-to-back games and having more points on the board in the Premier League. I think it's a mixture of both, but hopefully he begins to do that. He's got a big run now. The last thing I wanted to ask you quickly before we wrap up, it's been a great show, is Mainoo. A lot of questions about Mainoo. Do you think he will go? And do you think even maybe a reason Amorim's, you know, giving him reduced game time is because he knows, you know, if he does leave, that's money for him to bring in a midfielder that he does think suited to the way he wants to play?
Yeah, I mean, there is that scenario. I mean, I don't see him leaving. He obviously has to leave at the end of the summer window. That was turned down. There was no, from the people I spoke to, there was no indication from him apparently that he wanted to leave permanently. It was simply that I don't think I'm playing enough games. I want to go to the World Cup. I need to play regularly. Please can I go on loan? United said, I understand what your situation is, but it's not like you're not even making the matchday squad. You are an important part of the group. You are on the bench every week. If you were to leave, we need to replace you. We can't do that. We need you to stay. I don't see that situation changing in January. I do think that, well, there will be talks between Mainoo and the club before the January window to see where both sides are at. You know, there is a possibility, I suppose, that someone comes in with a lot of money in January that United think, yeah, you know, maybe it is time to cash in. Maybe we can use that money to buy someone who's more suited to the way that Ruben wants to play. You're right, though, in what you say. It's very, very difficult to get both of those things to happen in January. I think it's far more likely that he continues to be kind of on the fringes, unless he can force his way in the team, of course, but he continues to be on the fringes until the summer, and then they may look at it again. I think the situation is the same with Joshua Zirkzee, because if you, not playing right now, but Benjamin Sesko gets injured, the only player that in the squad who can replace him really is Zirkzee. So he probably feels like he's being underappreciated right now, but he is needed in terms of what, you know, Ruben sees with the squad, because he's the only backup to Sesko. I would expect that situation to be the same in January and get revisited again in the summer. The one thing on Mainoo is the academy record. You know, that there's that 87-year record of having an academy graduate in the squad. Ruben Amorim does not want to be the guy that loses that record. He's already said it publicly in a press conference. You know, there are people at United who have not reminded him about it, but they are conscious that they don't want that record to go. Against Sunderland, Mainoo was the only academy graduate in that squad. Now, obviously there is Tom Heaton's there, Tyler Fredrickson is in and around the squad, but he's nowhere near really playing regularly. If Mainoo was to go, there is a very real danger that academy record goes. And, you know, I think that United, in terms of business decisions, need to be very kind of ruthless with stuff like that. If they don't think that player is good enough, then you have to go. I think Cobby is maybe in a different bracket, because United are very, very proud of that record. It is a club that's been built on the production of youth team players through the years. You know, some of the best ever teams have been built on academy players. I think when it comes to Cobby, they would be very, very conscious of letting him leave and risking that record going.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. In the summer, I think if Amorim is still here, there's a big chance he goes. But
I can see that, because he will be looking at it. Cobby will be looking at it right now, and his representatives will be looking and saying, "We've had 10 months of this. I've not played. I'm not even sure his best position exists in that system." So it's not as if I think Ruben likes him. I think he likes him as a player, but his best position does not exist in that system. And Ruben has been pretty clear that he's not changing his system. So then, what does Cobby do? It's only natural that he's going to think, you know, maybe I could move on and do something different. There was interest from Napoli in the summer, led to believe that would be there again in January if there is an option to do a deal. He's probably looked at what Scott's done at Napoli
and now Rasmus.
And Rasmus has done at Napoli and thought, well, you know, maybe that could kind of rejuvenate my career. So I can understand why that's why he looks at that and thinks that might be a good option. But it has to get the green light from United, and right now I can't see that happening in January unless there's some kind of scenario where someone comes in with a lot of money.
Well, Rob, thank you very much. Backing Ruben Amorim till the end of the season.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
Heard it here first. A lot of our viewers really like that approach from you, and I can understand where you're coming from on it. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Fans really want to see Manchester United back at the top, but everyone has a different idea of how that works out and how you should handle it. But I think it's a sensible approach, and I think it's one that Sir Jim and the footballing hierarchy at Manchester United will want to take, and hope that there's enough there to do that. But thank you very much. Next time we speak, you never know, there might be a new bid for the ownership of Manchester United.
Probably talking about a new manager.
Yeah, we could be. But look, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, everyone, for getting your super chats in. If you like this video, make sure you smash a like on it. And yeah, thank you to Rob for joining us as well. And lastly, Daniel Thompson has just put in a chat saying, hope you're well, guys. Great show. Thank you. Well, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely weekend. No Manchester United this weekend, but we'll be back soon for Anfield away. It's going to be a big game. But thank you for watching, everyone. We will see you on the next one.